Charlie.
Hey, Mark, and here we are, another Winging It.
We are winging it again. Not too long after our last one.
Right.
Where are we going tonight?
So we're going to talk to James Gardner, who I believe he's either just finished his MFA in Concordia or is still doing it. I'm not entirely sure, but I believe he lives in Montreal right now.
Great.
And love his work. It kind of integrates painting and sculpture and in kind of installation.
Installations, yep.
Yeah.
It's join with video.
There we go.
Hi guys. Hello from the cold Montreal.
Recording.
Yeah.
Good evening.
Say again.
Just saying, welcome to Winging It.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
So you are in Montreal. Now, have you finished your MFA or you are in the process?
Yep, just finished. Actually, I just received my diploma in the mail the other day.
Oh, right on. Congratulations.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's pretty much the only sign that I've actually graduated because there was no ceremony and all that stuff because of COVID.
That's right.
Not that I'm one for all the fanfare, but it was strange. It just kind of slid by, you know.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Well, it's a way to mark whatever rites of passage or whatever, right? When you have ceremonies and stuff.
They are important.
Those boring ceremonies where you have to stand around. I do recall you did a walkthrough of your MFA show.
Yeah, I did.
And that was awesome. I caught about the last 15 minutes of it when you did it live. I think it was live was that on Facebook or?
Yeah, on Instagram, but I think Instagram now just puts everything on Facebook.
I think it does. Yeah, they're all.
But I don't really do those live things very often, or I guess push that hard on social media. But because of COVID again, it was actually really nice to be able to do stuff like that. And I think if it had been open to the public, the amount of people that actually would have come through to see the show, there was probably more that saw it on Instagram because I was, doing stuff like that, which was nice.
Well, you're also reaching people who aren't necessarily going to be in Montreal.
Exactly. Yeah, like yourself.
Cool. Yeah, that's cool.
So yeah, it was nice after all, but and some of the work is now in another exhibition, which is also closed. But
okay. But viewable online or?
It is. I'll be posting some more documentation in the coming weeks. Definitely.
Right on.
Yeah.
Now I believe you have
artists who've gone through this during the pandemic, where they were about to show or were expecting to show, because it's been shut down. In some big places too, unfortunately.
Yeah, we talked to a lot of people like in the spring who were just like had to shut down a show.
Many of the artists we've talked to I've asked them how has your productivity been during the pandemic. Many have actually found it to be quite high. I guess partly because artists they lock down all the time. They spend a lot of time hunkering down, working on their stuff, and and I'm just wondering, with the galleries somewhat open then shut again, shows being delayed, I just wonder when this thing lifts, is there just going to be an explosion across the art landscape? How's your productivity been? Have you been able to wax creative throughout all of this, or has there been something else going on?
Well, yeah, I think waves of a bit of both, but I think you're right. I think there will be a big kind of reveal once this is all over. So it's a backlog of stuff being created. But yeah, when it first started, I think there was a couple weeks when the first lockdown back in March, where there was a bit of shock, and it's like, okay, all I could really do was eat and sit on the couch, and which was nice, play with the cats.
Yeah.
But soon my living situation's pretty good, so we had some extra space to actually have little at-home studios for me and my partner at the time. So we actually got into a good kind of routine of working at home and doing stuff that I wouldn't normally do because I couldn't work in the studio. So I was working on some collage and stuff that actually really is influencing my studio practice now that I'm back there.
Great.
And then I was getting ready for my thesis, so I almost had no choice but to keep working. But it was kind of a perfect time to develop that work because I couldn't really do much else. So I was completely focused, and I think the work really developed in ways that it wouldn't had I not been.
So the works in your MFA show, like some of them are large and, you know, sculpture based. I'm assuming those were done before lockdown, and then I know there's some smaller pieces where those kind of.
Well, I was actually, my studios are pretty good too. So even when we were in the first lockdown, I was able to still kind of get there once in a while.
Okay.
And then throughout the summer, I was there quite a bit. And
Okay.
it's a big enough space and there's not a lot of people. So we can keep
cool.
and stuff like that. So a lot of the work in the show was maybe started maybe a year or so ago, but came to its final form just, you know, a couple nights before I was installing the show. So yeah, it was all really fresh.
I know how that goes. So I believe you have some images to show us, or?
Yeah, sure. Well,
we'll get to that. I just wanted to maybe before that, you know, I'm aware that you used to reside in Toronto and were part of a collective.
Yeah.
I wonder if you could talk a bit about that and maybe the change, how that came about, and you know, what's it like now, you know, being
yeah, I'd love to. Yeah, so I was part of a collective called Versus. We were like a 7-person collective, and we had like a live work space in the Portlands of Toronto, down by Sherry Beach.
Right on.
And a lot of us had met in university, and we kind of started doing at the University of Guelph. We started doing some small projects and stuff there. And then, a couple friends, Miles and Ryan, found this warehouse space, and we all decided to move to Toronto and give it a shot. And I don't think I would have moved otherwise, because I really don't know if I could have afforded an apartment and a studio. So it was great to have this kind of live workspace. And it was a pretty, sorry, my cats are breaking things. It was a pretty, big experiment in collective, like making work as a collective and living together and trying to do curatorial projects together. We didn't really set out to be, to make work together, but it just kind of happened, you know, a lot of ideas kind of came out through proximity. And before we knew it, we had a pretty big collective practice going. That was a really great way for all of us to kind of get to speak to our strengths, I guess, while kind of producing this like big group project. So some of them got pretty kind of weird, where there was a lot of, you know, I was really into like sculptural stuff, but other people were more into digital technologies and photography and things like that. So it was a big project that I would have never thought I would do.
Cool.
And at that time, we were all keeping our individual practices as well. So I was still painting a lot while I was at Toronto. But there was always kind of a push, especially near the end, where we're getting a lot of attention, where we just couldn't. I was taken away from my painting practice a lot, and I really wanted to get back to it.
Right.
And I think a lot of people in the collective felt similarly. It was a kind of a delicate environment, so we couldn't really just leave and come back kind of at will, or have other people take our studios over or anything like that.
Right.
So we largely put a lot of things on hold, grad school being one of them. So I think most of the members, actually, I think all of the members did a more secondary education after the collective.
How long were you guys together? It
was 7 years.
7 years, okay.
Yeah, it was a long time to share one bathroom with seven people for 7 years. It definitely ran its course.
Yeah, and you know, and you can only do that when you're younger.
Yeah, that's what they say anyway. Yeah, I would love to do more stuff like that here in Montreal, but just finding a space like that was such a important ingredient to that whole project. And I've got a great studio here, but I can't seem to find a good live work kind of setup. But it's been really nice to go to grad school and focus particularly on my own painting practice, and really flesh out a lot of those ideas that I'd kind of been working with for a long time.
I mean, I guess, you know, if we want to jump right into talking about that, I mean, one of the things I noticed from that period, your work seemed to be a little more abstract. I mean, there was a lot of three-dimensional elements with it seemed like wood and insulation foam and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the work that from the past year or two seemed to have some more like figurative and narrative elements to it.
Yeah, that was kind of the biggest thing that I wanted to focus on while in school, was dealing with this kind of problem that I identified in my practice, where I was kind of, everything was always, I was working abstractly and really about material experimentation and things like that. but there was always kind of this image like lurking kind of under the surface, it felt like. Or, you know, I would work on a painting that I thought was completely abstract. And then looking back at them now, I can kind of see how the images were kind of seeping in. One painting in particular, I might be able to show you guys later. I realized that like a lot of the triangles and these, what I thought were more kind of pure form, were just like what I was seeing on my everyday experience. Like living at Versus, we were right on the harbor, so there was always, you know, boats. So I realized they were sails, and there was like this, you know, always. I was amazed at how even when I tried to work abstractly, my environment always infected it. And so I thought that was something to pay closer attention to, and that's largely what I did during my master's, was really come to terms with the image. Yeah, it was really productive, and I think I learned a lot. It was always kind of a question of what kind of images am I interested in. And actually, if you'd like, I can show you some of those.
Yeah, why don't you pop those up and we'll...
So yeah, it was around 2010 that I discovered James Elkin's book, What Painting Is. And it's not the greatest title, but it really describes well the overlaps between alchemy and painting practice, or this kind of analogy that can be seen between the two. It was the first time I had heard of alchemy before. And so I really kind of started exploring that subject more. And a main kind of thing I was doing was just collecting these images into like an esoteric image archive, and largely just collecting them off the internet. It was kind of still early on when a lot of these things were a bit kind of messier online. Like there's not a lot of titles, and I couldn't figure out where these images were coming from, et cetera, et cetera. Sure. But I just kept kind of filling these file folders and becoming really enamored with what I was seeing, largely because I couldn't quite make sense of them. I didn't understand the symbolism. I didn't understand like a lot of what I was looking at, and it was really exciting.
A lot of it is hidden or secret. I've been interested in alchemy for probably 35 years now, so you know, not that I would say I fully understand it, but you know, this imagery it's very significant in my work. And
okay, yeah, yeah, it's very compelling imagery, and so there was immediately a desire to want to kind of learn more of it. Sorry, my cat.
Yeah. Cats love alchemy.
They do. They
do. Yeah.
So yeah, I was kind of collecting this imagery and getting really caught up with this stuff, and trying to research more of it. But I couldn't really find a way to bring it into my practice. And so the things kind of stayed separate for a long time mostly until I got to graduate school.
Right.
You got the idea. Yeah, really great book. I've read it many times now. It's a little like academically, it's a little it was done in the 60s, so it's a little kind of outdated, but a lot of what she talks about is being carried on in academic circles into what is now known as Western esotericism. There's a couple schools in like in Amsterdam and at the Sorbonne that have like research chairs dedicated to this, and you can actually get an MA in Western esotericism now. But I really got interested in delving more into that kind of academic current, and figuring out, I guess, the ways that images worked within, you know, things like magic and astrology and alchemy, tarot cards. And so this is kind of the first painting that was in the exhibition, in my thesis exhibition. Okay. And it's heavily kind of degraded, but you can actually see there is a kind of a figure in there if you look close enough.
Yeah.
The figure is actually based on this image here.
Okay, right on.
And I mentioned this kind of image encounter I had when I kind of got introduced to all these subjects. And this was the picture. And I just remember, you know, it was late at night. I think I was on YouTube watching like a really weird, like, you know, pseudo documentary on alchemy. And this image came up, and there was something, you know, about the time and the place, I guess. But it was just kind of like a shock to me to see a picture like this, and again, one that remains so kind of distant. Like I was like, what are all these symbols? Like I'd never seen the symbol for Mercury before. You know, I didn't know what a caduceus was, and then, you know, just really bizarre stuff. And I just keep seeing more and more of these types of. Of
course, yeah.
And there was always like the same but kind of different, like these weird remixes of them. And then, yeah, there's digital degradation that I really, really loved. And so that type of image experience is what really kind of underlies my experience with pictures and the paintings that we're going to look at. So always trying to kind of mimic that degradation, or this like image decay.
Okay.
And doing a lot of experimental kind of material kind of transformations to see how I can get those types of effects, but never wanting to just do the same thing.
Distress them and sort of antiquate them, sort of like a, I love that too, because it's about this, you're kind of playing with time, right? You're making it new, but really it feels and looks old.
Yeah.
Already aged.
Subverting time in a way. Reversing or subverting it.
And I think that's one of the strengths of working with images, is that they kind of have that type of life to themselves, where they're ancient but present at the same time. Warburg was really into this idea of what he calls the Nachleben der Antike, which is the survival of the antique, and how kind of ancient forms continually, he was really interested in the Renaissance, but continually get reimagined and kind of refound throughout time. Almost to the point where it's less of like what we generally understand as the life of an image, and it's more similar to like geology in a way, where, you know, these kind of eruptions and fissures and kind of earthquakes can happen that bring strange things to the surface. So yeah, I'm getting on a tangent here. So I was looking back at these older types of images to, just see what I could kind of get out of them, I guess, and how I could reuse them to see what kind of, the stuff, like the methodologies that I saw in my research with like the art of memory and stuff like that, how to use those and make the images my own in a certain way, kind of like this cover thing we were talking about earlier, like a cover band. But
you adapt.
But yeah, able to find more subjective resonances with each one. So this painting is actually based on a Giotto painting.
Oh,
and you can see here.
Oh, look at that! Yeah.
It's from the chapel at Padua, and he was somebody that was also really interested in the art of memory, that book that I was talking about earlier. And what really kind of shocked me when I was introduced to these subjects was that it was the art of memory wasn't just like this like passing thing, but it was a whole way of building images. And it's hard to imagine what, like for us moderns, what that would have been like. But, you know, before we had any tools whatsoever, like how did you hold all this information in your mind? How did you quantify it and remember it? And so a lot of these memory techniques were kind of ways to do that. And it was a really image-based system. So even when you're looking at Giotto, it was such a part of the culture that, you know, these were mnemonic systems to help, you know, as much as they were narrative tales, but also to help with the symbolization and even like liturgical practice and stuff like that. So I got really interested in these cubiculums, I've been calling them, but these patterned rooms or little chapels.
That is very cool.
Yeah, these great patterns that kind of blow out the architecture almost.
Now, it seems that the architectures of the older works, or the structure of the older works, are providing you with a structure for your works, sort of a structural underpinning on which to place the layers of color and of more abstract kind of imagery over top. Is that correct, or is there something more to that?
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, again, trying to use these kind of techniques that I'm learning about in my Western esoteric kind of research. Something important though to point out too is another material kind of experimentation is image transfers. So this essential figure here actually was a figure from one of the images I had that was using acrylic medium transferred onto the surface.
Okay, cool.
And similarly, this is like paper that's been pasted on there. So yeah, kind of, I'm not really like looking for abstract form, but going through material processes that I know are going to lead to these types of decay or image degradation, or just room to be able to move in and kind of manipulate material so that it continues to manipulate the image itself. a lot of the work in the show too, were all based around certain sets of images, referred to as the Deacon images, which are astrological kind of system of classification that was used as a kind of memory place for the art of memory. So I was kind of going back and seeing if I could use these old practices myself.
Cool.
So there's a wider shot of the whole exhibition.
Yeah, now that, yeah, so that's your MFA show.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, right. And so I love the stuff you're doing here with the you know, the physical stuff, the sculpture, and the kind of the whole installation aspect of it. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's always been really important to my practice. A lot of, as you can probably tell, a lot of the materials I use, there's a lot of like debris and waste that kind of happens.
Sure. And there's a certain kind of alchemy, or, you know, going back to Art Tavera and people like in the 80s, like Bill Woodrow, who would take found objects and transform them. It was like, it was their form of alchemy.
Yeah. And it is like a big kind of alchemical principle that, you know, what you're looking for is probably in the dirt and the mud, as opposed to, you know, on the pedestal, so to speak.
Exactly. Yeah. Every day.
So yeah, that's always been something of a obsession of mine in the studio, is kind of keeping everything. And then these things largely existing in piles, and kind of, they start to develop these kind of sculptural forms. I don't think of them as sculptures so much as, I guess, like armatures to show paintings with, or objects that contextualize the painting's place of origin in a certain sense. Or it's kind of like an image rubble. Like if a lot of these materials, like the spray foam and things like you see in this box in the front and center there, are byproducts of making paintings. So if we go and look at this image here, for example, all of this patterning was marked out using insulation foam and clay and stuff like that. And then kind of like masking something off, like a lot of painters use tape. I would just use the same thing with spray foam.
Spray it on the canvas.
Exactly, yeah. And then use, like, kind of make these little pools of where the, you know, that pink is.
Yeah.
And then once it had dried, I would peel off the insulation foam and be left with, you know, a more painted surface. But all of that debris always accumulates, and I was always really interested in it. And so that's what is the kind of the point of origin for a lot of the sculpture in the show.
Huh.
And
I think
again,
nothing goes to waste.
Nothing goes to waste. That's right. Well, yeah, I've gotten a little bit better, especially since I moved to Montreal. I did have to throw out a lot of stuff, and I will say it did feel good. But yeah, there's a lot to be found in the part that you didn't mean to cut, you know.
But there's not just there's not just sort of a symbolic relationship between these elements. There's an actual physical relationship in terms of this was how this was made using these materials. And then those materials are set up as maybe not a separate work, but a related work.
Yeah, that's right. And yeah, I think it's really important to contextualize paintings in that sense, especially when you see them in exhibition context. Everything's kind of, it's pulled out of context so much. So it's nice to have a few kind of objects that can point the viewer in that kind of direction without being too explicit. I don't ever want to bring the whole studio into the gallery, but it's nice to have a few like objects that can point in that direction.
It's beautiful.
Or confuse the narrative at least a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to, so, you know, these topics and themes are close to me, the esoteric stuff, and so I'm just curious if any of that is part of your own personal belief system now, or like spiritual practice. Because for me, those things are still alive, alchemy, and a lot of these things are actually, you know, they're not just academic, they are actually things that can be used by people for personal transformation. So I'm just curious if you have a relationship to that material in that way.
Yeah, it's more, it was something I discovered as a result of painting. Like all of these subjects that I've been talking about were introduced to me through making paintings and painting research, I guess, you know. So I was really surprised when it started to coincide with belief systems and things like that. So it was kind of, something great to kind of stumble upon. And in school, it was great to kind of take these ideas and see how you can do it in an academic context. But I think from, you know, like an occult or esoteric practitioner's point of view, it can be really difficult to explain to others what's kind of happening. And, you know, language becomes a really big problem. So it was really great to learn about these more academic fields so that I could use that information, but talk about paintings in ways, hopefully, that it can become more communicatable to other people. There's a discourse kind of around it. Yeah, throughout school, I did keep that very separate, and people would often ask what my belief system is, and I would often decline because, you know, in a certain sense, in a critique, it's not really right, or somehow it can
or whatever, right?
It lacks a critical rigor, you know, and everyone brings these very kind of subjective terms. Can mean a bunch of different things. Like in every painter studio, especially when I was at school, everyone always, you know, mentions this kind of like spooky stuff, you know, whether it's I'm a spiritual person or, but yeah, so many of those basic terms mean very different things. So it's nice to use academic framework so that we can all be on the same kind of page for that stuff.
They're all subjective, really.
Yeah, exactly.
The lived experience is rather subjective, and you know, that's the kind of the mystical side of that is its direct experience, which you know, it's fine to talk about, but
yeah, cool. But yeah, it was really great to discover these subjects, and as a result, I did pursue more of a kind of a practitioner approach as well, which I'm happy to focus on a bit more now that I'm done school, for sure. Even in Toronto, there was a few organizations associated with the OTO and like the LAMA and stuff like that. So I went to the few of those meetings, and there's another group here that has, you know, similar kind of similar temples and stuff like that. So it's interesting stuff to delve deeper into, but I'm still kind of coming to it from the outside. It's still kind of very new and kind of developing. But in a way, like my studio practice does encapsulate some of those ideas as well, depending on what you think of as, like, you know, ceremony or ritual and what those things can be. I think I was kind of intuitively doing those things when I made art a lot of the time anyway. And so it's nice to discover these more
they're formalized ritual, and they go back centuries.
Yeah.
And you know, just as a painting, this works. Whether you know what's the story behind it or not, you can walk into the gallery and look at this painting and love it for its aesthetic.
Just for its formalistic
aesthetic. But when you know the backstory and the research you've done, it makes it
even more.
But you know, if it was just that, but the painting itself was, you know, not interesting, but you know, these work as just pieces of art.
Yeah, they're not dependent on the backstory.
Separate from any you know, theory or backstory.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I think you know, we just had that Hilma Klimt show at the Guggenheim. There's been a lot of throughout the States. Actually, in England right now, there's a bunch of exhibitions that are, you know, talking about the artist as esotericist, the artist as occultist, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it's really having like a kind of a moment in culture. But as a result, I think we also see a lot of really bad art that uses those themes or kind of appropriates them in certain ways.
Sure.
I think it happened. It was in the late 19th, early 20th century that kind of thing was happening. I recall. I mean, Picasso early on was really interested in magic, sort of the relationship between magic and art, and he kind of saw himself as a bit of a magician. And I would assume the symbolists, who were sort of like late post-romantics, were also, I mean, they were certainly absorbed by these kinds of things. And so it certainly had its day at that time. And it was a very, for me, it's one of the most interesting periods in art history, certainly in say, in the last few hundred years. But it's interesting to hear that this kind of thing may be having a resurgence now. Sort of like a new symbolist.
It does seem to. I mean, you know, pre-Raphaelites were all mystical and you know, anyway.
We're bringing Middle Ages back, baby.
Yeah, well, now that, you know, Western esotericism is like an actual academic discipline and is being taken seriously in a lot of instances, we're realizing when we go back through art history that this was just the stuff that no one was talking about. So that these ideas have always kind of underlied art making in many contexts, but either one, people don't know how to talk about it, or it was taboo or whatever.
Well, yeah,
it always seems to have
a lot of things were secretive, you know, the Masons, the Rosicrucians, all that, because, you know, you might get killed if you talk about that shit.
Well, that's true. Artists were destroyed in various cultures at various periods, right? For reasons like that.
Yeah.
All right, let's see some more work.
Yeah, sure. So there's some details. Again, these kind of more experimental. This one was actually the most unstable as a result of my experimentation, and maybe being a little bit hurried by the by deadlines. But so some of that stuff is cracked off quite a bit more, and it doesn't seem to want to stick as much as I had liked. But in a way, that's, you know, that's a part of the work. So I don't.
It's a life process, or it's got its own lifespan.
Yeah.
Wondering if you talk about, you know, like the artistic influences, as well as some of the sort of the you know, more mystical and Western occult underpinning. Curious what artists, visual artists, because I look at this and I see, just with this images, I see Jasper Johns, but I don't know if that's, you know.
Yeah, I'm pretty like voracious when it comes to what I kind of ingest in terms of artistic influences and stuff like that. It was nice to almost focus less on, or focus more on that research that we've been talking about, as opposed to like really going through and studying a ton of painters. Yeah. And whenever people ask me what artists I'm looking at, I think they're always surprised because it doesn't often reflect the type of art that I'm making in certain senses. But like in terms of painters, for sure, like painters like Elizabeth McIntosh or Margot Williamson, working in Toronto right now. Yeah. People kind of using this imagery in this kind of, I don't know, there's like that unnameable quality to it, I guess. But yeah, something to do with the image and a layer of abstraction that kind of comes with it. And like constant kind of innovation and stuff like that on the surface that you see from painters like McIntosh. Harold Clunder was a huge early influence for sure, and remains a big one for sure. Peter Doig has been, in terms of color and stuff like that, and it's been really useful to look at kind of the legacy that he kind of invokes, going back to like Gauguin and those types of colorists, and how that could function pictorially has been really influential. Yeah, I guess we were talking about the connection the paintings have with the sculpture, and yeah, I think this one's probably one of the best examples of that kind of situation. The way that an image is made, there's so much kind of connected with it that isn't material. There's all this like mess that kind of comes with image making, and yeah, trying to bring that into the exhibition context more.
Right.
So I've actually made a few versions of this painting, and they're largely based on this image here, which is another great alchemical image that I've been kind of stuck with for a long time. Just this idea of this purification that happens. So this is like the king in like the sweat box, and he's supposed to be sweating out all of the impurities. So that's a similar kind of setup with a kind of a figure in a tent, though.
Okay. I mean, it's not unlike the sweat lodge idea.
Yeah, it's a similar thing, I guess, from a different culture.
Yeah, exactly.
I was really into saunas and stuff. I lived in Finland for a year, and I really got the sauna culture up there as well. But yeah, something about this image in particular that just really stayed with me. And then we have another kind of little pile of things. One of the biggest, another big influence that from my Toronto days that still is kind of reverberating in my head is the Leslie Street Spit, one of my kind of all-time favorite places to go visit. So actually a lot of those rocks and stuff that you see in the bottom are from there. Right. And on some of the, one of those beaches, there's those weird kind of white things that you see in the bottom. Yeah. It's like wands, I call them.
Yeah, yeah.
I actually started making ceramic casts of them for the first time. So you'll see those kind of peppered through the exhibition space as well.
Cool.
But yeah, there's something about the Leslie Street spit, which also really kind of goes hand in hand with my ideas of what an image is. And, you know, just this idea that that Leslie Street spit is built on this kind of debris, old rubble of things, and this kind of slowly wearing away at it through nature to make new form. Yeah, really excited. There's actually a new book that's coming out. I forget the artist's name now, but Stephen Bulger Gallery is releasing it.
Right.
The
photographs. Photographs.
Sorry.
Photographs.
Yeah, the photographs, but I think it talks about the history of what's called Tommy Thompson Park, like the Leslie Street spit.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's got a really interesting history, and the way that it's been taken over by nature and stuff is really
well.
really cool.
And I remember when the very first coyote pair was spotted there, right? The coyotes were going pretty much close to extinct, and then it was like there were a pair of coyotes on Leslie Spit. Now, of course, they're like on Mark Street, my street.
They're
roaming the neighborhoods now.
Very nearby right now.
Yeah. They're
oh wow, that's great.
Yeah. This painting just for some reason it reminded me of kind of early mid-period David Hockney. I don't know if he's influenced at all, but it was just a feel to it before he got too flat, and he did a lot of stuff with sort of figure ground kind of merging and stuff, which I love, like early to mid 60s.
Okay. Yeah, I've been looking more and more at his work. The first time I was, when I was in London working at the Warburg Institute on a couple trips, was the first time I've kind of had his work around a lot.
Right.
And so, yeah, really incredible stuff. It's been great to see up close. So yeah, it's I guess it's in there.
Yeah, this piece too.
Actually, I kind of want to point out, like, these are all kind of collaged together too. So in the studio, the paintings kind of, you know, come together and dissolve, they get cut apart. It's not, I've never until recently, you know, stretched a canvas and started painting and let it remain a square. They've always started as kind of fragments that kind of grow and build, and, you know, different paintings kind of steal from each other. And there's this real kind of back and forth that happens between works in the studio. So they're kind of, you know, there's a lot of staples kind of holding things together. You can see an elastic there, some paper binding tools, really into grommets. And I just bought like a grommeting gun and things like that. So I'm starting to get better at these techniques, I guess. And so things are getting a bit more archival, and learning to stretch shape canvases and stuff too. So this one was probably the most successful, where I actually was able to get this on the left-hand side, that kind of fine, weird shape that I often liked when I worked with wood, which largely stopped when I left Toronto and switched to canvas. But that's actually stretched, and so that I don't get any, you know, it holds up better over the years when it's in storage and stuff like that. So,
are we still seeing the king there on the right? Is that?
Well, it's another kind of alchemical figure, and you'll get a example of the image that it came from too. This guy here.
There we go. Look at that.
Yeah. I love this picture so much. Again, it was one of those early ones where I was just kind of like, what is going on? Like, why is there a bird on this guy's head? And, but yeah, again, like the bird's often used to depict material states. And so like the bird perched means that the material is kind of stagnant, or it's not doing anything. But when it's flying above, that means it's kind of been activated, or, you know, the symbolism kind of
waiting to be activated. Is the bird a dove, or is it a different, or another?
I think that's supposed to be a dove there, yeah. Okay. But there's lots of birds in alchemy too, lots of pelicans, and
the dove in this case, is it referring to the, you know, the sort of Christian symbolism of the dove as the spirit, or is it some other kind of, or does it take on a different meaning in alchemy?
I think with alchemy, it kind of goes into like a spectrum of understanding, because you're at once, you know, their idea that you're working with material substance, and so it's a way to describe what's happening to the material. But they also thought that the material substance was a reflection of the consciousness of the practitioner. So it also has these kind of spiritual leanings as well. So I think it's really great that it can encapsulate, you know, multiple kind of understandings within one kind of symbolic gesture, which is why I keep going back to these pictures, I think. And yeah, again, like this idea of heat being applied, and I've always kind of thought of the studio as this kind of, pressure cooker, or this little kind of oven furnace that, the Athenor, that things kind of get built. So again, it really provides a really good analogy to the painting practice, as much as it's just a cool picture as well.
Yeah, it cooked up.
So that's that piece installed. And yeah, so in the picture, I guess it looks more like a crow, but it's actually what's called a Eurasian coot. It's a waterfowl that exists in Europe, that I only ever saw when I went to Amsterdam for the first time a couple of years ago. And yeah, that bird just really stuck with me. I did a lot of drawing of it when I was hanging out in the parks in Amsterdam, and so it made its way into this painting.
So you transformed or alchemized the dove into this bird. Does it have a personal symbolism for you, or is it just something that you were interested in from your personal experience?
Yeah, no, it's definitely that I'm able to take these old images and include these kind of more subjective meanings into them, even if they aren't so much things that I'm able to articulate in a certain sense. But I was doing a lot of writing fiction and short stories and stuff when I was there, and so I wrote this really strange story about going swimming in the canal of Amsterdam and coming to the surface and this bird being on this character's head. So that's kind of where it was going. But yeah, this kind of idea that of being static and waiting to be activated by the heat, by the in this painting, there's these kind of little figures chopping wood. So kind of the idea that something's about to happen, or like you're on the brink of something, or yeah. So I've also been including a lot of these cage structures that you see here. They're actually called gabions, and you see them all over the place. They're used as like retaining walls. So you see them at the side of highways, or
they fill them with rocks and gravel and stuff.
Exactly. Yeah. So again, I was always trying to point the viewer in the direction of how I understand images to kind of function, and again, trying to work with this idea that the life of an image is kind of akin to the life of a rock, and it's subject to accretion, sedimentation, erosions, et cetera, et cetera. So again, putting these two things next to each other, trying to bring out those kind of similarities, and then using them as kind of great ways to just bring in all that debris from the studio. Again, all this like picture debris, this picture matter, and kind of giving it more of a structural way to be shown without having to make it into so much of a sculpture, or start to use sculptural motifs like plinths or pedestals and things like that. And so here, I think I'm really happy with this version of this installation, and how it sets those things next to each other and contextualizes my painting practice. So I hope to do more.
There's something behind the painting too, I see.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a real kind of, I think we'll get some pictures of that next.
Okay, good, like very three-dimensional.
Yeah.
This one in particular, just reminded me a little bit of Rauschenberg, just sort of like the way he is, what did he call them, Mark? The construction, I forget. Assemblage. Yeah.
I'm also thinking of, and help me with the pronunciation of his surname, David Altmage.
Oh yeah, David Altmage.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, his stuff's great. And again, he kind of gets to this like weird, kind of esoteric, kind of mystical kind of a feeling, but it's without being cheesy somehow.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's remarkable stuff. So you get the back view there.
Yeah, love that.
And yeah, it's really, it's not very considered in some senses. Like largely, those are found objects. Like I purchased those. They're produced for that as these gabions, and then just pretty much went to the piles in the corner of my studio and filled them up more or less. Some of them kind of match in color and things like that, but yeah, they're pretty raw and
very raw.
Well, and one of the things, and I've taught art off and on for many years, is composition is everything. Like you could take anything, and if you can compose it in a way, which you have done here, you can use rubble, you can use foam, you can use marshmallow, and you can use anything if you can create an interesting composition.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Yeah, yeah, which is why I, enjoy making exhibitions and doing stuff. And people hate on the white cube a lot, but I kind of love it for that purpose. You're able to give everything such careful attention and direct this type of yeah, image looking experience, I guess. A few more shots here.
Oh yeah, look at that.
Yeah, I've also been making these cement poles, or they're kind of like pillars, I guess. They're more like core samples than anything.
Right. Yeah.
I've kind of exploited the idea to make them, art as opposed to just kind of documents of my studio. But the basic premise was that, I've got this huge pile of foam and whatever debris in the studio, and that I could do like you get the stratification of the layers if I just put like a sonotube and poured concrete down there. So it's like a core sample of this image accumulation. And yeah, I've obviously tweaked that a lot to get the kind of forms that I wanted, but yeah, they've been great kind of, and they were very heavy, which is the only thing I've regretted, but great scaffold for paintings, because you can actually hang paintings on them or use them as, display tactics.
Mm-hmm. Awesome.
So this is my favorite painting in the show, I think.
Wow.
And
I love that.
Yeah, so I think I'll show you some images that it relates to as well. But this one really, when we talk about relationship to how I'm using this kind of archive of images, and I'll go back to what we said right at the beginning about like cover songs or whatever. Yeah. This is, I think, this is the most successful I think it's been in terms of, yeah, not trying to redo an image, but to synthesize a bunch of images into a new kind of manifestation of them. So like I said, all the paintings in the show were based on this certain astrological system called the deacons. So you get 12 signs of the zodiac. Within each of those signs, each sign gets 3 faces, as they call them, and those are the deacons. So there's 36 in total. Right. And I've only done about 10 of them now, but I hope to do the whole kind of system. These deacons are really ancient images. They've been around since early Babylonian astrology, and they keep kind of enduring throughout history, and it's really kind of amazing. And we see them contemporarily in things like tarot cards. So the pip cards are actually the deacons, and so we have this really great image tradition that it's multicultural. It's of many different generations, and yeah, it's a really fascinating history. So for the show, I was particularly interested in researching the deacon images more. So here we have this is a kind of a manuscript about astrology showing all 3 of the deacons. So this is the 3 deacons of Cancer. Sometimes they use the lobster instead of the crab. And then you have the 3 deacons kind of sitting at the top. And so each one gets a planet kind of as well. And so already we have an image system which gives us symbolic resonances. It gives us forms to work with, and the lobster or crab or whatever, and planetary connotations. And all that astrology stuff always has color correspondences, and so you just got this huge wealth of kind of information to kind of focus on. So in particular for that painting, I was doing the second deacon, and these are pictures of these deacons. So during the Dark Ages, we lost a lot of this information in the West. And so a lot of these astrological images and histories were only preserved in places like Afghanistan and in the Near East, if you want to call it that. And so it wasn't until the Renaissance where a lot of these things were being rediscovered in the West. Like Marcellino Ficino was really influential in bringing these texts and translating them, and they were being used in the Florentine Renaissance largely. And so these are all from these recreations of these images, and they're all in manuscript form. So you have many variations of the same kind of images, and they're all the second deacon of Cancer, even despite their many kind of variations. So you can see there's kind of a synthesis of many of those things. So we have this table form in the front here. We have the kind of mountain and trees and the architecture. And so they all kind of relate to, yeah, especially like we have this mountain form in this version here. This is the Sloan manuscript at the British Library. And then there's these two figures that are actually sitting around the table. And then of course we have the actual table. And then I used similar kind of architecture to kind of contextualize the whole thing. A big thing in the art of memory and in these mnemonic kind of tricks is this use of intercolumnar kind of spaces, these kind of archways, and you know, building that as a home for the image in a certain sense. And there's some details there. So again, at a certain point I was, you know, painting things, and I'm not so much one to want to sit down and recreate stuff. I'm more interested in these material experiments. So when I kind of realized I had this huge wealth of images in this archive, why not start using them more directly? So here you see an example of some of those image transfers I was talking about, where this tree was actually just a transfer from one of these manuscripts that I was just showing you, blown up and digitized and kind of messed with, but recreated. And then this patterning too. Is actually from Santa Maria Novella in Italy.
Very cool.
Wow.
And yeah, you see the grommets and stuff holding these things together.
Yeah.
I like the grommets. They do relate to more to like signage and stuff like that, which is a bit more peripheral. But I just, as a device, they're just so perfect because you can put multiple layers of fabric together, and they just kind of like sandwiches it all. Like it's really sturdy. So yeah, I use them a lot.
Yeah.
And then you can see the table structure.
They're a very pleasing object also.
Yeah, yeah, I do like them a lot, yeah. There you see the table structure a bit more detailed. And there was two figures there, those two women that come up in the images a lot in the Deacon imagery, but they've been kind of veiled with this patterning.
Yeah.
I think it's been weird for me to be in grad school and having like tons and tons of studio visits, like almost to the point where I'm like, okay, that's enough kind of thing, to being
tired
in lockdown and no, to being in lockdown and being like having none of that, no studio visits, being done school now, and you have like no one around. So it's been a long time since I've been able to talk face to face, so to speak, with people about these things. It feels really good, and I don't know if you can tell, but I'm really excited about these ideas. So yeah, no, I was really happy.
What's maybe before we go is like, what's next? What's
yeah, so I got some there'll be a few things to be announced shortly. I'm not allowed to tell people, but there's lots of stuff coming in 2021, which I'm really excited with. One of which is oddly a travel scholarship called the William Blair Bruce European Travel Scholarship. That I was actually supposed to be in Greece right now, but because of everything, obviously it's been postponed. So I'll be working with the Byzantine and Christian Museum in Athens, which is one of the greatest collections of Byzantine icon painting and stuff like that. And all of these things have really kind of not been taken care of very well until recently. And so they're like a lot of these really old kind of relic-y things that are kind of eaten by bugs, or kind of, there's lots of image decay for me to go kind of study closely. And yeah, with these permissions, I'm hoping to be able to work higher with the staff a bit more to understand what ways they're kind of trying to preserve these things, and how these things corrode in the first place, and trying to kind of mimic that kind of stuff. And in that's part of the same kind of trip, we'll be visiting a bunch of monasteries and stuff in Cappadocia, Turkey, where there's still kind of living traditions of making these types of paintings. And as Yates and other people kind of point out, the art of memory was a huge thing within monastic cultures. And so I'm curious to see how I can continue that kind of research by looking at actually going to see these monasteries and places like that. So as soon as it's possible, that's the next step, is to do another big research trip, which I'm really pleased to be able to be doing. And I've got an upcoming exhibition as well, where I'll be looking more closely at like Dionysian imagery. I'm really kind of interested in this vines and trees and stuff like that is depicted there. So yeah, it's going to be an exciting year. Despite COVID and everything, it's been the 2020 has been all right, and things are kind of opening up for my painting practice. And I'm really excited to.
Yeah, well, looking forward to see how
Yeah,
that gets
wait.
syncretized into new works, synthesized into new works.
Yeah.
Can't wait. I find what that stuff you just showed us some of the most exciting stuff I've seen lately. So.
Oh, thank you very much.
Yeah. And once again, congrats on the MFA, and
yeah, it feels good to get that out of the way. We'll see if a PhD is going to happen or not. We'll see. I'll definitely take some time, but it is nice to have that kind of institutional support to do this type of research. And I feel like I found a niche that I want to, that needs to be developed further, especially in Canada.
Yeah. All right, cool. Thanks for spending some time with us tonight. And yeah, good luck with all that. And yeah, I can't wait to see new works. All right.
Me too. Yeah, no, the studio has been going really well. It's I'm looking forward to the holidays to be in there full time.
Right on. Stay safe.
Yep.
Thanks, Charles. Thanks, Mark. Nice to talk to you both face to face. And
all right.
Bye now.
Be in touch.
Bye-bye.